There are several types of research misconduct. These include fabrications, falsifications, plagiarisms, and others. The fabrications is referring to the creations of the data illegally. This normally happens when the researcher can't wait for the result due to the timeline pressure, and in order to meet the deadline, the researcher chooses to create the data. You know that normally a research project has its own deadline. A typical research grant, where funding is given to researchers to conduct the research, normally has a deadline of 2 years to 3 years. If the researcher is unable to complete the research project within the timeline, he or she needs to have good justifications to request for the extensions of the project. There are other considerations, which could be due to the availability of the fundings, whether there are more funds for the researchers to complete the project and acquire the relevant data. Under such circumstances, out of the pressures to complete the research grant, some may choose to fabricate the data, which is unethical. The fabrications can also happen within the postgraduate students, as they also have their own timeline pressure. The normal durations for a master student is about 2 years, and PhD students is about 3 years. The maximum durations can be double of those. You know that the postgraduate students have a lot of problems that they need to deal with during their research. There are a lot of explorations, trying and errors. As the time reaches to the end of their postgraduate studies, the pressures will be higher. Some may receive pressures from their supervisor, who are very demanding, and they find difficulties to meet the requirements of their supervisors. Eventually, they choose to fabricate the data, hoping that the supervisors is unable to detect that, and this is also unethical. On this aspect, normally I will advise my research students not to fabricate the data, as the nature of the research is we are investigating something that we do not know for the time being. Because we do not know something, that is the reasons that we are conducting a research. Therefore, we will have to do the experiments or the study accurately to verify or to confirm the hypothesis. In most of the cases, our hypotheses are theoretically true, and it is only reflecting the ideal situations. When it comes to the actual study, there are various aspects which is not that easily 1 + 1 = 2. Normally, we will not get the perfect results, and only through the real investigations, all those aspects that we are not aware of will surface. No matter how confident or how strongly you believe your hypothesis is true, it will only be true after you have proven true through proper investigations. It will be much more easier for us to analyze the data, which might end up to be unfavorable to our hypothesis, as compared to fabricating the data on basis of our hypothesis. Because later, we will need to go through a process of analysis and interpretations of the data. Then we will have to discuss the result in depth, as well as from various aspects. And the in-depth discussions of a result is the gist of the research. We define a good research is based on the in-depth study and investigations, but not based on whether the result is favorable or unfavorable. Even though the result is unfavorable, but through the discussions, you find new insights of the subject that being studied. The students can still obtain their masters and PhDs. Therefore, it is not necessary for you to fabricate the data. And fabricating the data will mess up the data that you have already available, and this may lead to wrong findings and wrong directions of the conclusions. And most of all, it is an unethical conduct. Next is the falsifications of the data. This is referring to an inappropriate alterations of data. This can happen when some researcher find out that the result is unfavorable or in total contradictions to their desired hypothesis. Then they start to pose inquiry in terms of the data that they have obtained, and they strongly believe that their hypothesis should be correct, but the data shows the otherwise. And in order for their research to look good, they choose to alter the data so that the desired hypothesis is proven. This falsifications is also a research misconduct. Again, we go to the fundamentals of the research, which is focusing on the in-depth study, not whether you obtain the result which is favorable to the hypothesis. If you are doubtful with the data, you might want to look into your experimental or your study works in detail. See if there are any mistakes or the errors occur while you're conducting the research. You might also want to check the analysis and the derivations process, see if there are any errors that could lead to inaccurate results or data. And if you can't find any errors there, it will be safe if you redo the experiments or the study to confirm the data is correct. You should not falsify the data. If the data is true, you will be able to gain new insight or new understanding of the subject that you are studying. No matter how confident with you of the hypothesis, you should not falsify the data. Worst come to worst that the data is obtained as it is, even though after you repeated the test, and you cannot make sense of why it is happening. In your technical writing, such as thesis or the journals papers, you can clearly state that you are not aware of the reasons of the outcomes. Probably suggest some directions where the future researchers can look into, which might lead to the relevant data. So the bottom line is, when the data comes up not similar to what you have desired for proving your hypothesis, and you have confirmed the data that you obtain is true, normally it gives you some informations. This could be something that you have overlooked in the process of formulating a theories or principles, and this is a good input to the research community, bringing alarms and awareness onto the aspects of study. And normally the research community will appreciate it if you have those highlighted. And in the case that in your capacity you are not aware of the reasons, you may post such inquiry in your academic writings and leave it to the future researcher to find the answers. Therefore, there is no necessary for you to falsify the data. The next one is the plagiarism. It is referring to taking others' work without attributions. That means the persons who write the papers or introducing the ideas or the theories is not being given credits for his work done. This is also an unethical conduct when you use their works without giving acknowledgement. Therefore, whenever we use the ideas or the concepts given by somebody else, you will have to do proper citations and provide the details of their publications in the reference list. As for the other type of research misconduct, it involves the ethical violations in research, which is normally related to the professional conducts when you are doing the research in the laboratories and other aspects. You can have an idea of the ethical conducts by referring to the professionals and ethics of your relevant field of study. Especially for the engineering fields, there are professional conducts to the engineers, and as the academia, there are also professional conducts being outlined by the relevant institutions and your universities. So you should theoretically abide to the relevant professional conducts. So whoever who would like to involve actively in the research field, kindly be aware of this research misconduct, and you know that the research community is very good in documentations as well as searching informations in documents. For example, if you are actively involved in one specific field, you will know some researchers who are also actively involved in the field. You may not recognize him, he may also not recognize you, but you know the names and you know the works being done by him. So all this can be easily being traced from the internet as well as among the research community. Not abiding to the research conduct will affect your reputations in the research community. Next, since that we have mentioned about plagiarism, these are the examples how your supervisor or reviewer or editor alert about the plagiarism. First thing first, you should to your maximum capacity to ensure yourself not to be involved with the plagiarism. And when you are in the positions as a supervisor or a reviewer or an editor, these are some ways that you can consider for you to check the plagiarism for your students or your departments. This is how they are being alert about the plagiarism. The first thing is the original author comes to know and inform everyone about the plagiarism case. Back to the point that I mentioned just now, the research works is normally well documented and they are indexed in such a way that is easily traceable. Whichever the works being done, as long as it managed to get published, it will be accessible to everyone who is interested with the field. And when you're doing the research, you're often finding yourself to find all the possible relevant researches, including those which has been published long time ago, maybe 30 years, 40 years back. If your contributions is one of the critical one, someone may still referring to your work after 100 years later. In another way to say, there is no secrecy in the field of research. People can find it. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, it can be 10 years later. And also the researchers are well trained with the skill of searching informations as well as the critical thinking. Based on the publication date, they are easily to identify who is doing the plagiarism over somebody's work. Therefore, in this sense, you have to be careful with the plagiarism. Sometimes the reviewer finds out about it during the review process. Normally, journals, they will assign the reviewers in the similar field who are quite well versed with the topics that you are studying. The reviewer itself might also be actively involved with your study as well. You will expect the reviewer know as much as you in the field of the study. If not, it will be more, as the reviewers normally come with the experienced researcher. Therefore, it is also possible for the reviewers to know whether the plagiarism takes place. Another manner is the readers come across the articles or books while doing the research. When you publish your paper, you expect your words being read by somebody. And these somebodies are the people who are also doing the research in the similar field. You know that when they need to do the research and referring to somebody's work, they are not going to refer to one or two articles. In fact, they are referring as many articles as they could, especially when they do the literature review. And this kind of reader normally will read your words, word by word, sentence by sentence, as your works will be referred while they're doing their own research. The point here is the reader will read it carefully of your research work. They are also able to determine whether you have done the plagiarism. So at the end of the day, there won't be any secrecy if you have done misconduct in the field of engineering. There are some other ways, such as the supervisor may observe inconsistent writing style. You know, different persons have their own ways to write, and most of us, even the researcher, as well as the research students, English is not their first language. Therefore, our writing style normally inherited some shadows of our mother tongue language, especially for us with moderate and low proficiency of English. We are unable to write as good as those with native English writers. Therefore, when we do the plagiarism, there will be a very obvious that suddenly the English writing is too good. And this is one of the ways that I identify my students, whether they have copied the words of somebody else, claiming that those are their works. The next one, it will be by using tools and software for us to know whether there are plagiarisms. There are many relevant software. One of those is the Eng-aim. Most of the institutions are using this in my country, and it is a very powerful tool for us to determine the percentage of plagiarism, whether the works are being done properly without copying other people's works. As for the postgraduate students, normally before you can submit for your final thesis or dissertations, the School of Postgraduate Study will make compulsory for the checking of the plagiarism by using the software such as Eng-aim. So if the percentage is higher than the limit allowable by the school, the students is unable to submit their thesis and dissertations. You don't want to cock yourself at the end of your postgraduate study, realizing that you have copied most of the work and are not allowed for the submissions of the thesis. Therefore, you will have to ensure yourself not to involve with the plagiarism from the beginning of your research. In fact, all this research misconduct should be avoided throughout your research study, and you know that if you involve with the fabrications and falsifications, which is being identified by the School of Postgraduate Study, actions will be taken. Therefore, you don't want to position yourself in such an awkward manner. Some may think that if you can bypass that and acquire your master's degree and PhD degree, not being detected by the School of Postgraduate Study, it will go back to the point that I have mentioned previously. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, it may be someday in the future. The university have the right to revoke the degree which is awarded to you if they find this. And when reached to that state, you will find yourself in a very miserable conditions, and your reputations will be affected in the field. Therefore, try our best not to get caught in this misconduct. Don't even try to manipulate, falsify, or doing any plagiarisms that can affect your future.